The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I stared at my phone for a full 10 seconds before answering, wondering who dies at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Angelina, this is Piper, your father's night nurse. You need to come in. His breathing is laboured and we're concerned about... I was already pulling on jeans. I'll be there in 20 minutes. My name is Angelina, and I'm the daughter who moved 3 hours away thinking distance would make watching my father die easier. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. The hospital corridors at 3 a.m. smell like disinfectant and broken dreams. I found Dad's room and pushed through the door, expecting the worst. Instead, I found him sitting up in bed, oxygen mask loose around his neck, looking tired but alert. Hey, sweetheart. His voice was raspy but warm. Sorry they scared you. Don't apologise for breathing problems, Dad. I kissed his forehead. Where's Trisha? She went home around midnight. Said she needed her beauty sleep. He tried to smile. You know how she gets when she's tired. I knew exactly how she got. Trisha had been my stepmother for 8 years, and in that time, I'd watched her perfect the art of being present when it looked good and absent when it mattered. Mr. Roy had a rough night, Piper explained, checking his IV. His oxygen levels dropped, but they're stable now. We called because his emergency contacts list has you first. First? I looked at Dad. Not Trisha? I updated it last month, he said quietly. You're the one who always comes. The words hit harder than they should have. I squeezed his hand and stayed until sunrise, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer. Trisha showed up at 11 a.m. looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect blonde highlights, designer athleisure wear, and enough concealer to hide the fact that she clearly slept through the night just fine. Oh, Angelina! You're here! She rushed over with theatrical concern. I came as soon as I got the message. I was so worried I could barely sleep. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly I almost admired it. How is he? She asked, not looking at Dad, but at her reflection in the window. Better, I said. The nurses got his breathing stabilised. Thank God! She pressed a manicured hand to her chest. I don't know what I'd do without him. Dad smiled weakly at her, and I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. He loved her. Really, genuinely loved her, which made what happened next so much worse. Angelina, honey, can we talk outside? Trisha's voice dropped to that breathy whisper she used when she wanted something. It's about Roy's care. In the hallway, she transformed. The theatrical concern melted into something more calculated. I've been researching rehabilitation therapists, she said, pulling out her phone. There's this amazing woman, Dr. Martinez, who specialises in recovery for patients with Roy's condition. She's had incredible success rates. That sounds great. What does insurance cover? Well, that's the thing. Trisha's eyes filled with tears on cue. She's not in network. But Angelina, if there's even a chance she could help Roy walk again, shouldn't we try? Shouldn't we do everything possible? The guilt hit like a freight train. Here I was, living 3 hours away while she was supposedly researching miracle cures. How much? I asked. 10,000. I know it's a lot, but I've already liquidated some of my jewellery to cover part of it. I just need help with the rest. She grabbed my hand. I can't bear to see him like this. Can you? I looked through the window at Dad, who was dozing peacefully, and felt the familiar weight of being the responsible one, the one who fixed things, the one who made the hard choices. I'll transfer it today, I said. Really? Her relief seemed genuine. Oh, Angelina, thank you. Roy is so lucky to have you. I sent the money that afternoon from my car in the hospital parking lot. $10,000 I'd saved for a down payment on a house, transferred to Trisha's account with a memo that read, Dad's therapy. 3 days later, I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when I saw it. A tagged photo that made my blood freeze. Trisha, in a bikini, laughing in a hot tub at some luxury resort in Scottsdale. The caption read, sometimes you just need to treat yourself. Da. Self-care. Yeah, da. Bless ma. La. Living my best life. Posted yesterday. While Dad was struggling to breathe in a hospital bed. I stared at that photo for so long my screen went dark. When I turned it back on, she was still there, still laughing, still spending money that was supposed to save my father's life. That's when I realised I wasn't dealing with a neglectful stepmother. I was dealing with something much worse. I didn't confront her. That's what the old me would have done, march into that hospital room and demand answers while she cried and made excuses. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I got methodical. The first thing I remembered was the security system. Dad had fallen 6 months ago trying to get to the bathroom alone, and after that scare, I'd insisted on installing cameras throughout the house. For safety, I told him, so we can check on you remotely. Tricia had pitched a fit about privacy, but Dad overruled her. The cameras stayed. I'd never actually used the app until now. Sitting in my apartment that night, I logged into the system and scrolled back through the footage. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the day after I'd sent the money. There was Tricia in the kitchen at 9 a.m, talking on the phone while Dad's morning medication sat untouched on the counter. "No, Daniel, I'm not being dramatic," she was saying to someone. "The old man's getting worse, which honestly speeds things up for us." My hands started shaking. I kept watching. At 11 a.m, she was supposed to help Dad with his physical therapy exercises. Instead, the camera showed her in the living room, painting her nails while Dad called for help from the bedroom. "Tricia, can you help me to the bathroom?" "In a minute, Roy." "I'm in the middle of something." She never went. 20 minutes later, Dad struggled to the bathroom alone, using the wall for support. I fast-forwarded through the day. Lunch medications skipped. Afternoon therapy session ignored while she video-called someone, laughing about playing nurse to an invalid. But the worst part came at dinner. Dad was at the kitchen table trying to eat with hands that shook from his condition. He dropped his fork twice. "God, Roy, you're making such a mess," Tricia snapped. "Maybe you should just use a sippy cup like a toddler." "I'm sorry," Dad whispered. "I'm trying." "Try harder. Or don't. The will's almost mine anyway." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I slammed my laptop shut and walked to the bathroom, where I threw up everything I'd eaten that day. When I came back, I opened the laptop again and kept watching. I had to know how deep this went. The next few days were more of the same. Medications, forgotten. Therapy sessions skipped. Dad left alone for hours while she went shopping or got her nails done. But Friday's footage made me see red. Tricia was on the phone with someone, Daniel, I assumed, while literally throwing Dad's evening pills in the trash. "The doctor says he needs these 3 times a day, but honestly, what's the point?" She laughed. "He's not getting better. Might as well save money on prescriptions." "Mom, that's pretty dark. Even for you," came a voice through the speaker. "Oh, please, Daniel. Don't go soft on me now. We've been planning this for years. A few more months and we're set for life." "What if Angelina finds out?" "She won't. She's 3 hours away playing tech girl, and she feels too guilty about not being here to ask hard questions. Besides, she just gave me 10 grand for a fake therapist. She's easier to manipulate than I thought." They both laughed. I sat there in my dark apartment, watching my stepmother mock my father's suffering while spending money I'd given her to help him. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't breathe. But I kept watching. I had to see it all. Saturday's footage showed her getting ready for her spa trip, packing designer luggage while Dad slept in his chair, his breathing laboured. "Don't wait up, honey," she called to him sweetly. "I'm going to visit my sister for a few days." Dad didn't even wake up. Sunday through Tuesday, the house was empty except for Dad. No one came to check on him. No one brought meals. No one made sure he took his medications. On Tuesday morning, I watched him struggle to reach his phone and call 911 because he couldn't breathe properly. That was the call that brought me home. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called my cousin Jolie. "Hey, it's late," she answered. "Everything okay?" "No, nothing's okay." I took a deep breath. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not ask questions yet." "Okay." "You still work at the hospital, right? You still have access to prescription logs and patient records?" There was a pause. "Angelina, what's going on?" "Jolie, I think Tricia is trying to kill my father." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me prove it." "When?" "Tomorrow. And Jolie, we're going to need to be very, very careful about this." "Why?" "Because when I'm done, I'm going to destroy her." Jolie met me at a coffee shop downtown the next morning, looking like she hadn't slept much either. Show me what you have, she said without preamble. I pulled out my laptop and played the footage of Tricia throwing away Dad's pills. Jolie's face went pale. Jesus, Angelina, this is elder abuse. It gets worse. I showed her the conversation about the will, the neglected meals, the ignored calls for help. Okay, I'm convinced. What do you need from me? Dad's prescription records for the past 6 months. I need to know what he's supposed to be taking versus what he's actually getting. Jolie nodded. I can access that, but we need to be smart about this. If we're building a case, everything has to be documented properly. I'm not just building a case, Jolie. I'm building a bomb. We spent the morning at the hospital. While I sat with Dad, Jolie pulled his records. What she found made my stomach turn. Look at this, she said, showing me printouts in the family lounge. He's prescribed 3 different medications for his heart condition, 2 for blood pressure, and supplements for his muscle weakness. And, according to the pharmacy logs, only about 60% of these prescriptions have been filled in the past 3 months. The rest were marked as patient declined or no longer needed. But Dad didn't decline them. No. Someone with access to his insurance information did. I stared at the papers. She's been cancelling his medications. It looks that way. And Angelina, some of these are life-sustaining. Without his heart medication, his condition would deteriorate rapidly. How rapidly? Months, maybe weeks, depending on his overall health. I felt sick again. She's not just neglecting him. She's actively making him worse. We need more proof, Jolie said. This is good, but a lawyer would want a paper trail. That's when I remembered something. She's been using the family computer for everything. Same Wi-Fi network as the security cameras. So I might be able to recover deleted texts, emails, browser history. If she's been planning this, that's probably illegal. So is elder abuse. Jolie looked at me for a long moment. What do you need me to do? That afternoon, while Tricia was at the hospital putting on her devoted wife act, I went to Dad's house. The family computer was in his office, and I'd helped him set up the cloud backup system months ago. It took me 2 hours, but I found everything. Deleted text conversations between Tricia and Daniel going back 8 months. Browser history showing searches for how long can elderly survive without heart medication, and signs of natural death in elderly patients. But the smoking gun was an email thread between Tricia and someone named Marcus, who appeared to be a lawyer. The will is airtight, Marcus had written. As his spouse, you inherit everything unless he changes it. But if there's any suspicion of foul play... There won't be, Tricia had replied. He's old and sick. These things happen naturally. His daughter lives 3 hours away and barely visits. No one will question it. What about the son? Daniel knows the plan. He'll back up whatever I say. And the money you mentioned? I've been testing the waters. Asked the daughter for $10,000 for a fake therapist. She sent it immediately. She's so guilty about not being here, she'll believe anything. I printed everything. Then I called Marvin, Dad's lawyer. Angelina, how's your father? Not good, Marvin, and I think I know why. Can you meet me somewhere private? I have something to show you. We met at his office an hour later. I spread everything out on his conference table. The camera footage, the prescription records, the deleted texts, the emails. Marvin studied it all in silence, his face getting darker with each page. This is attempted murder, he said finally. Can we prove it? With this evidence, absolutely. The question is what you want to do about it. I want to destroy her. Completely, publicly. I want everyone to know what she is. Marvin leaned back in his chair. There are legal ways to handle this. We could file charges, get a restraining order, contest any will changes. Or we could be more strategic. Your father's birthday is next week, right? Tricia's planning that family gathering at the hospital? How did you know about that? She called me yesterday. Wanted to make sure I'd be there with the will, just in case something happens to Roy during the celebration. His expression was grim. I had my suspicions before, but now what? Now I think it's time we gave her exactly what she's asking for. He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. But first, we need to make sure your father is protected. What do you mean? I mean we're going to change his will, tonight, and we're going to make sure Tricia doesn't get a single penny. Can we do that? With this evidence of elder abuse, we can do whatever we want. He started gathering the papers. But Angelina, if we're going nuclear, we need to be prepared for the fallout. I'm ready. Are you? Because once we do this, there's no going back. Your family will never be the same. I thought about Dad struggling to the bathroom alone, about Trisha laughing while throwing away his medications, about her calling me easy to manipulate. Good, I said. It shouldn't be the same. Marvin nodded. Then let's give her a birthday party she'll never forget. That night, Marvin and I sat in Dad's hospital room while he slept. The new will was spread across the bedside table, and Dad had signed it an hour earlier after we'd shown him everything. His reaction was the worst part. Not anger, not shock, just this quiet, broken acceptance. I knew something was wrong, he'd whispered. I just didn't want to believe it. Now Marvin was explaining the legal implications while I worked on something else. A letter that would end Trisha's world. The new will puts everything in a trust, Marvin said quietly. Joint trustees are you and Jolie. Trisha gets nothing. Daniel gets a small inheritance, but only if he cooperates with the investigation. What about the house? Yours. Along with his retirement accounts, investments, everything. She'll have to move out within 30 days. I nodded, still typing. The letter was taking shape. 3 pages of carefully documented facts, each one a nail in Trisha's coffin. What's your plan for delivery? Marvin asked. Piper's going to read it aloud at the birthday party. Trisha invited everyone. You, Jolie, Daniel, even some of Dad's old work friends. She wants an audience. She's going to get one. I finished typing and printed the letter. Marvin, what happens after? Legally, I mean. With this evidence, criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, possibly attempted murder, civil suits for the money she stole, and once this goes public, he shrugged. Her reputation is finished. Good! The next morning I met Piper during her shift change. You sure about this? She asked, taking the sealed envelope. Once I start reading, there's no stopping. I'm sure. Just wait until everyone's gathered around Dad's bed. Trisha will probably want to make some speech about family and love. Let her finish, then say you have something from me. And if she tries to stop me, she won't. She'll be too shocked to react fast enough. Piper nodded. Your dad's a good man. He doesn't deserve what she's done to him. No, he doesn't. That afternoon, Trisha called me, her voice sickeningly sweet. Angelina, honey, I'm so excited about tomorrow. I've ordered a beautiful cake, and I invited everyone Roy cares about. It's going to be perfect. That sounds wonderful, Trisha. I was thinking maybe you could say a few words about what Roy means to you. I know he'd love that. Actually, I already prepared something. Piper's going to read it for me. Oh, how thoughtful. I'm sure it will be beautiful. If she only knew. The morning of Dad's birthday, I arrived at the hospital early. Dad was awake and alert, looking better than he had in weeks. Jolie had been monitoring his care personally, making sure he got all his medications. How are you feeling about today? I asked. Nervous, he admitted. But ready. I should have seen this years ago, Angelina. I'm sorry I put you in this position. You didn't put me anywhere, Dad. She did. Trisha arrived at noon, looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Designer dress, perfect makeup, carrying flowers and balloons. Happy birthday, darling. She kissed Dad's forehead. 76 never looked so good. Dad managed a weak smile. Thank you. Everyone should be here soon. Marvin's bringing champagne. Well, sparkling cider for you, of course. And I have such wonderful things to say about our life together. I bet she did. Jolie arrived first, followed by Marvin carrying a briefcase instead of champagne. Daniel came in looking uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Daniel! Trisha beamed. Come give Roy a birthday hug. Daniel awkwardly hugged Dad, then retreated to a corner. A few of Dad's old colleagues showed up, making small talk about retirement and grandchildren. The room filled up quickly. Okay, everyone. Trisha clapped her hands. I want to say something before we cut the cake. She positioned herself next to Dad's bed, one hand on his shoulder. Roy and I have been married for 8 wonderful years. Through sickness and health, for richer and poorer, we've stood by each other. Her voice caught perfectly. Watching him fight this illness has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also shown me what true love looks like. Several people nodded approvingly. Someone said, "Ah. Roy, you are the strongest, most courageous man I know. And I promise you I will never stop fighting for your health and happiness. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The performance was flawless. Now let's celebrate this amazing man! Everyone applauded. Trisha basked in the attention. That's when Piper stepped forward, holding the envelope. Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Angelina asked me to read something she wrote for her father. Oh, how sweet. Trisha smiled. Please, go ahead. Piper opened the envelope and began to read. Dear Dad, on your 76th birthday, I want to tell you how much you mean to me. But I also need to tell you, and everyone here, about something I've discovered. The room went quiet. Trisha's smile faltered slightly. 3 weeks ago, I gave Trisha $10,000 for a rehabilitation therapist who doesn't exist. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Piper kept reading, her voice steady and clear. But that was just the beginning of what I found. Piper paused, looking around the room. Every face was frozen in confusion, except mine, Dad's, and Marvin's. Trisha's smile had completely disappeared. I'm sorry, what is this about? Trisha laughed nervously. Piper, maybe we should save this for later. Let her finish, Dad said quietly. His voice carried more authority than it had in months. Piper continued reading. While Trisha was supposedly researching this miracle therapist, she was actually at a luxury spa in Scottsdale, posting photos on Instagram with hashtags like living my best life. Someone gasped. I watched Trisha's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, panic, anger. The same day she begged me for money to save Dad's life, she was laughing in a hot tub that I paid for. This is ridiculous, Trisha said, her voice getting shrill. Angelina, you're obviously upset about something, but making up stories. But that's not all I found, Piper read on. I found security footage from Dad's house showing Trisha throwing his heart medications in the trash, while saying, the will's almost mine anyway. The room erupted. Dad's colleague Frank stepped back from Trisha like she was radioactive. That's a lie, Trisha shouted. There's no footage of anything like that. Actually, there is, I said, speaking for the first time. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to play it for everyone? Daniel suddenly looked like he was going to be sick. I found deleted text messages between Trisha and Daniel, planning this for months. I found browser searches for how long can elderly survive without heart medication. I found emails with her lawyer discussing how no one would question Dad's death because it would look natural. Stop, Trisha whispered, but Piper kept reading. I found prescription records showing that 60% of Dad's life-saving medications have been cancelled over the past 3 months. Someone with access to his insurance information marked them as no longer needed. Oh my God, said Margaret, one of Dad's old friends. Trisha, is this true? Of course it's not true. Angelina is having some kind of breakdown. I found bank records showing Trisha created fake invoices for medical equipment that was never purchased. I found Venmo payments to herself from Dad's account for medical supplies that were actually spa treatments and shopping sprees. The room was dead silent except for Trisha's rapid breathing. But the worst part, Piper continued, was watching footage of Dad calling for help to get to the bathroom, while Trisha sat in the next room painting her nails and telling someone on the phone that she was playing nurse to an invalid. Frank stepped forward. Roy, is this true? Dad nodded slowly. I'm afraid it is. You're all insane. Trisha's composure finally cracked completely. Roy, tell them this is crazy. Tell them I love you. Do you? Dad asked quietly. Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Of course I do. We're married. We took vows. For richer or poorer, Dad repeated her earlier words, but apparently only richer. Jolie moved closer to Dad's bed, positioning herself between him and Trisha. This is all circumstantial. Trisha was getting desperate. You can't prove any of this. Actually, Marvin said, opening his briefcase, we can prove all of it. And we have. He pulled out a thick folder. Trisha, you're under investigation for elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder. The police will want to speak with you. Police? Daniel finally spoke up. Mum, you said this was just about getting the inheritance early. You said Dad was going to die anyway. The room went dead silent. Daniel realised what he'd just admitted. Daniel? Trisha hissed. Shut up. No, Mom, I can't do this anymore. He looked at Dad. Roy, I'm sorry. I should have said something months ago. What exactly should you have said? Marvin asked, pen poised over a legal pad. She's been planning this since she married him. She showed me Dad's will, said we just had to wait for him to die naturally. But then when he got sick, she started speeding things up. How? Skipping his medications, ignoring his therapy. She said it would look like natural decline. Tricia lunged toward Daniel. You little... Frank and another man grabbed her arms. Get your hands off me, she screamed. This is all lies. Angelina is jealous because Roy loves me more than her. Actually, Dad said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, I think we need to talk about that. He looked directly at Tricia. I loved who I thought you were. But that person never existed, did she? Tricia's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked genuinely devastated. Roy, please. I do love you. Maybe I made some mistakes, but... Mistakes? I stood up. You tried to kill him. I never! You threw away his heart medication. I was confused. I didn't know... You searched for how long he could survive without it. Tricia looked around the room at all the horrified faces staring at her. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Roy, you'll regret this. All of you will. Actually, Marvin said calmly, I think you're the one who's going to have regrets. He pulled out another document. Roy signed a new will yesterday. Would you like to know what's in it? Marvin held up the document like it was a weapon. Roy's new will, signed yesterday in the presence of 2 witnesses, removes Tricia entirely from his estate. Tricia went white. That's impossible. We're married. I have rights. Not when there's documented evidence of elder abuse, Marvin said calmly. The law is very clear about that. What does that mean? Frank asked. It means Tricia gets nothing. Not the house, not the retirement accounts, not the life insurance, nothing. You can't do this, Tricia screamed. I gave up 8 years of my life for him. You gave up 8 years planning to kill him, I said. Daniel stepped forward, his face pale. What about me? Marvin consulted the document. You received $25,000, Daniel, but only if you cooperate fully with the police investigation. That's it. 25,000? Tricia whirled on her son. Do you see what your big mouth just cost us? Mum, you were going to let Roy die. He's dying anyway. At least this way we would have been set for life. The room erupted again. Margaret started crying. Frank was shaking his head in disgust. So who gets everything? Someone asked. The bulk of the estate goes into a trust, Marvin announced. Joint trustees are Angelina and Jolie, with instructions to use the funds for Roy's care and medical expenses. And after Dad passes? I asked, though I already knew. The remaining assets transfer to you, with a portion set aside for medical research into his condition. Tricia's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, staring at nothing. 30 years, she whispered. I spent 30 years looking for security, and now I have nothing. You have your health, Dad said quietly, which is more than you were planning to leave me. Roy, please, we can work this out. I'll get help. I'll change. It's too late for that. Piper stepped forward again. I'm sorry, but I need to finish reading Angelina's letter. Tricia looked up with dead eyes. There's more? There's always more, I said. Piper found her place. But this isn't just about money or inheritance. This is about what happens when someone thinks they can destroy a family and walk away clean. What does that mean? Daniel asked nervously. It means I've sent copies of all this evidence to the district attorney, the state elder abuse hotline, and 3 local news stations. Tricia shot to her feet. You did what? Channel 7 is running the story tonight. Local woman accused of trying to murder husband for inheritance. They have the security footage, the deleted texts, everything. You can't do this to me. My reputation... Your reputation, I laughed. You are going to let my father die slowly while pretending to care for him. What reputation? I have friends. I have a social life. People will see this. Good. They should know what you are. Marvin closed his briefcase. Tricia, I'd recommend getting a criminal defense attorney. Today. This is insane. Roy, tell them to stop this. Dad looked at her for a long moment. You know what's insane? I actually mourned the woman I thought I married, but she never existed. I'm still that woman. I can be that woman. No, Dad said firmly. That woman wouldn't have thrown away my heart medication. That woman wouldn't have laughed about playing nurse to an invalid. That woman wouldn't have stolen money meant to save my life. Tricia started crying, but they weren't the practiced tears from her earlier performance. These were raw, desperate sobs. Please, she begged. Don't destroy me. I'll leave. I'll disappear. Just don't put this on the news. It's already done, I said. The story airs in 3 hours. Angelina, please. I'm begging you. Did you listen when Dad begged for help getting to the bathroom? She flinched like I'd slapped her. Did you care when he called your name and you ignored him? I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to research how long he could survive without medication. Daniel stood up abruptly. I need to go. Roy, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. Daniel, wait, Dad called. You don't have to leave. Yes, I do. I knew what she was doing and I didn't stop it. I'm as guilty as she is. No, Dad said firmly. You were manipulated by your mother. That's different. Is it? Yes. Because you're trying to make it right now. That matters. Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. I'll talk to the police. I'll tell them everything. Thank you. Tricia watched her son walk out, then turned back to the room full of people staring at her with disgust and horror. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with rage. I'll fight this. I'll prove you're all lying. With what evidence? Marvin asked. We have video footage, deleted texts, prescription records, bank statements, and your son's testimony. What do you have? Tricia opened her mouth, then closed it. That's what I thought, I said. Security appeared in the doorway. Someone had called them. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one of the officers said. Why? I haven't done anything wrong. Actually, the officer said, we have a warrant for your arrest. The officer stepped into the room, his partner right behind him. Patricia Walton, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. This is a mistake! Tricia backed against the window. I want a lawyer. You'll get one. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Roy! She looked desperately at Dad. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Dad closed his eyes. Officer, please do what you need to do. The handcuffs clicked into place. Tricia's perfectly styled hair was falling in her face. Her designer dress wrinkled from struggling. You have the right to remain silent, the officer began. I'm not staying silent. This is a setup. Angelina planned all of this. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Roy, please, don't let them do this to me. But Dad had turned away, staring out the window. As they led her toward the door, Tricia twisted around one last time. You think you've won, Angelina. You have no idea what you've started. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I've started. Justice. The door closed behind them. The room was silent except for the beeping of Dad's monitors. Frank cleared his throat. Roy, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Thank you all for being here. Margaret wiped her eyes. We had no idea. She seemed so devoted. She was devoted, Dad said quietly. To my bank account. One by one, his friends said their goodbyes, promising to visit again soon. When the room finally emptied except for family, Dad looked exhausted. How are you feeling? Jolie asked, checking his pulse. Tired, but lighter somehow. Dad, I said, sitting beside his bed. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Don't apologise. You saved my life. I should have seen it sooner. We all should have, but you're the one who did something about it. Marvin packed up his papers. Roy, the police will want to interview you tomorrow. Just tell them exactly what happened. Don't embellish, don't minimise. What happens next? With this much evidence? She'll probably take a plea deal, 5 to 10 years most likely. And the house? It's yours now. Tricia has 30 days to remove her belongings, but she'll be in jail, so her family will have to handle it. Dad nodded. What about Daniel? If he cooperates fully, he'll probably get probation and community service. The DA wants the bigger fish. After Marvin left, it was just me, Dad, and Jolie. The birthday cake sat untouched on the bedside table. Some party, I said. Dad actually smiled. Best birthday I've had in years. Really? Really, I finally know who my real family is. Jolie squeezed his hand. We're going to take good care of you, Uncle Roy. I know you will. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You destroyed my life for nothing. He's going to die anyway, and now you'll have to watch it happen, knowing you could have just let nature take its course. I hope it was worth it. I showed the text to Jolie. She's texting from jail? Jolie asked. Probably her one phone call. I deleted the message and blocked the number. What did it say? Dad asked. Nothing important. But Dad knew me too well. Angelina, I sighed. She said this isn't over, that you're going to die anyway and I'll have to watch. Dad was quiet for a moment. She's probably right about one thing. I am dying. Dad, let me finish. I am dying. But now I get to die surrounded by people who actually love me. I get to die with dignity, with proper medical care, with my daughter holding my hand instead of someone counting down the days until she inherits my money. Tears started falling before I could stop them. You gave me the greatest gift possible, Dad continued. You gave me back my life. However much time I have left, it's mine again. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Later that evening, I was in the hospital cafeteria when Daniel found me. Can I sit? I nodded. I talked to the police for 3 hours, he said. Told them everything. How do you feel? Terrible. Relieved. Scared. He rubbed his face. I keep thinking about all the times I could have stopped this. Why didn't you? Because she's my mother. And because... He paused. Because I was scared of her. I've been scared of her my whole life. What do you mean? She's not just manipulative with other people. She raised me to be afraid of disappointing her, afraid of not being useful to her plans. I studied his face. Are you making excuses? No, I'm explaining, not excusing. What I did was wrong. What I didn't do was worse. So what now? Now I try to make it right. I'll testify against her if I have to. I'll help however I can. And after that? I don't know. Start over, I guess. Figure out who I am when I'm not afraid. I looked at this man who'd helped his mother try to kill my father and felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Daniel? Yeah? Don't waste the chance she never gave Dad. Don't waste your second chance. The news story aired that night while I sat with Dad in his hospital room. We watched Channel 7's investigative report together, seeing Trisha's mugshot flash across the screen alongside security footage of her throwing away his medications. Local woman arrested for elder abuse, the anchor announced. Patricia Walton allegedly tried to hasten her husband's death to inherit his estate. Dad reached for the remote and turned it off. Enough of that, he said. How's your apartment search going? I found a place 20 minutes from your house. 1 bedroom, decent rent. You don't have to move back for me. I'm not moving back for you. I'm moving back for me. I squeezed his hand. Turns out I don't like being 3 hours away when my family needs me. The next morning, Piper knocked on the doorframe. You have visitors. 2 detectives entered, followed by Daniel. He looked like he hadn't slept. Mr. Roy, I'm Detective Martinez. We need to ask you some questions about your wife's care. Dad answered everything honestly. Yes, his medications were often missed. Yes, he'd noticed Tricia seemed distracted and absent. Yes, he'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't wanted to believe it. And you, Ms. Angelina, the second detective said. When did you first become suspicious? When I saw her Instagram photos from the spa. The same day she begged me for money to save Dad's life. What made you decide to investigate further? Because nobody else was going to, and my father deserved better. After the detectives left, Daniel lingered in the doorway. Roy, I wanted to tell you something. What's that? When I was a kid, before Mom married you, we moved around a lot. Different men, different houses. But you were the first one who ever asked me about school, who came to my baseball games. Dad's eyes softened. I remember those games. You had a good arm. You were more of a father to me than my real dad ever was. That's what makes this so much worse. Daniel, look at me. Dad's voice was firm. You were a child when your mother and I got married. Children aren't responsible for their parents' choices. But I'm not a child now. No, you're not. And now you're making your own choices. Better ones. Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. I'll keep making better ones. The district attorney's office called that afternoon. Tricia had accepted a plea deal. 7 years for elder abuse and fraud. The attempted murder charges were dropped in exchange for her cooperation and a full confession. 7 years, I told Dad. Is that enough? It's something. And her reputation is destroyed. The story's been picked up by 3 more news stations. What about the money she stole? Marvin says we can recover most of it through civil court. Her assets are being frozen. Dad closed his eyes. I keep thinking about the woman I thought I married. She felt so real. Maybe parts of her were real. Maybe that's what made her so good at this. Do you think she ever loved me? I considered lying, giving him a comfortable answer, but he deserved the truth. I think she loved the idea of you. The security, the lifestyle, the inheritance. But love you? The real you? I shook my head. No, Dad. I don't think she did. He was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for being honest. Always. That evening, Jolie brought Chinese takeout to the hospital room. We ate lo mein and watched old movies while Dad dozed in his chair. How's he really doing? I asked quietly. Better. His heart function has improved since he's been getting proper medication. He's not dying tomorrow, Angelina. But he is dying. We're all dying. The question is how we spend the time we have. My phone buzzed. A Facebook message from someone I didn't recognise. I saw the news about Tricia. I'm her neighbour. I wanted you to know that everyone in the neighbourhood suspected something was wrong. She used to complain about taking care of your father like it was such a burden, but then she'd drive off in her Mercedes to go shopping. We all thought it was strange. I showed the message to Jolie. People knew, she said. They just didn't want to get involved. But they're willing to gossip about it now. That's how it works. Everyone's brave after someone else does the hard thing. Dad woke up as the credits rolled on the movie. What did I miss? Nothing important, I said. Just some people finally finding their courage. Better late than never. Is it, though? Dad looked at me seriously. Yes, because courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You were terrified of what you might find when you started digging, weren't you? Terrified. But you did it anyway. That's real courage. I didn't do it to be courageous. I did it because I was angry. Sometimes anger is just love with nowhere to go. I thought about that as I drove home that night. Anger as love with nowhere to go. Maybe that's what justice really was. Love finally finding its target. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. Unknown number. Hello? This is Daniel. I wanted to tell you something. What? He asked. Thank you. For what? For stopping her. For saving Roy. For giving me a chance to be better than I was. Don't thank me yet. Be better first. I will be. Good. Because karma doesn't always need help, but sometimes it does. And I'm done being the only one willing to help it along.
My name is Alana Briggs, and the first thing my father ever said to me in that room was not a greeting, not even an acknowledgement. He leaned just slightly toward me, his voice low enough so no one else could hear, and muttered, still clinging to those little translator tricks. The war room at the Pentagon smelled faintly of coffee, gone cold and polished leather. Maps glowed on the wall, streams of coded chatter flickering across giant screens. Generals sat with ribbons gleaming, analysts shuffled papers, aides tapped on tablets like their fingers could keep the world from unraveling. And there I was, the one no one expected to speak, seated beside the very man who had once erased me. I kept my eyes forward. His words struck the way they always had, half sneer, half dismissal, but this time I didn't flinch. I let silence carry the weight between us, though inside my pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my jaw. When General Lawson entered, the room seemed to tighten. Every breath pulled into order. He didn't waste time. He didn't smile. He simply sat, leafed through a folder, and then lifted his head. His voice was calm, deliberate. I need to verify something. Then he spoke. Not in English, not in Arabic, not even in the polished Persian I'd studied for years. It was Dari, but not classroom Dari. It was raw, tribal, the kind I'd only ever heard once before, whispered by a grieving mother in a dirt-stained village halfway across the world. 5 words dropped like stones into the silence. Every face around the table stiffened. No one answered. Not the analysts, not the polished experts, not even my father. And that was when I knew. My moment had come. I grew up in a house where silence was the sharpest weapon. My father, Colonel Richard Ward, believed words were wasted breath unless they carried orders. He filled rooms with presence, not conversation. And when he did speak to me, it was often to remind me that discipline mattered more than curiosity. I learned early that approval was something I would never hear in his voice, but silence wasn't empty for me. When I was 10, I found an old shortwave radio in the basement. The static hissed and cracked like a living thing. And then, one evening, I caught a language I didn't recognize. The syllables ran like water over stones, strange and rhythmic. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew it wasn't noise. I wrote the sounds down on my math homework, filling the margins with shapes that looked more alive than numbers ever had. My mother noticed before my father did. She was already sick by then, her voice thinner every week, but she sat on the edge of my bed one night and whispered something I still carry with me. Whoever understands language understands war before it starts. It was the last full sentence I ever heard from her. After she was gone, the house grew even quieter, except for my father's clipped commands and the steady rhythm of my brother Ethan's footsteps on the stairs. Ethan was everything my father wanted: broad shoulders, fast runner, eager to follow orders. He didn't love the uniform, but he wore it like armor to protect himself from our father's gaze. When he enlisted, my father clapped him on the back and said, "Finally, a real Briggs." He never said that to me. So I hid. Not from them, but with my notebooks. By 13, I could slip between English, Dari, and Pashto without thinking, memorizing proverbs that seemed to carry more truth than anything spoken at our dinner table. My father called it obsession. I called it survival, because every time he dismissed me as too soft or too bookish, I went back to the words I was collecting. They didn't bruise me. They didn't scoff. They gave me a place where I wasn't a mistake. And even then, even before I knew how far those words would take me, I felt it in my bones. Silence might have ruled our house. But language was power. By the time I finished high school, my notebooks were stacked higher than my dresser. Whole pages filled with dialects no one around me could pronounce. My father thought I'd wasted my youth. He wanted me to study engineering, something useful, something he could brag about. Instead, I joined the army as a linguist. To him, it was proof I was naive. To me, it was the only path where what I loved might actually matter. They sent me first to training in Monterey, and then to dusty forward bases where the sun cracked your lips and the air smelled of diesel and sand. I wasn't issued a weapon at first, just a headset and a notebook, but soon I learned words could stop bullets faster than armor. One afternoon in Kabul, our unit rolled into a crowded street. A boy, maybe 10 years old, stepped into the open holding something metallic. Soldiers raised their rifles. My throat closed, but instinct took over. I shouted in Dari, "He's not smuggling. He's a child." The boy froze, lifted a dented cooking pot, and the rifles lowered. 20 seconds, and a massacre had been avoided. No commendation followed, no medal. Someone muttered lucky guess, but I knew it wasn't luck. Still, back home, my father dismissed it all. "You think yelling foreign words makes you a soldier," he said once, eyes cold across the kitchen table. Ethan was already enlisted by then, the perfect son, the one who wore our father's pride like a second skin. I was still the girl with translator tricks, yet with every mission, I realized more clearly what my mother had meant. Translation wasn't about perfect grammar. It was about hearing what others missed: the tremor in a voice, the hidden weight in a proverb, the silence that carried more danger than threats. That was the work no one saw, and the work I knew I was born to do. Ethan never wanted to deploy. He told me one night before shipping out, his voice cracking the way it had when we were kids sneaking sodas in the garage, I'm not ready. Alana, I don't think I'll ever be. But he couldn't say that to our father, to him. Hesitation meant cowardice. Within a week, Ethan had signed the papers. My father called it honor. I called it pressure, dressed as pride. 6 months later, a roadside bomb tore through his unit. Wrong place, wrong time. The report claimed. I didn't believe it. I'd seen the intercepted chatter that morning, heard the urgency in a voice that warned of traps along that very road. I'd flagged it, sent it up the chain. Hours later, the memo was gone. My access suspended. My name nowhere on the record. The official story blamed bad intel. My father never looked me in the eye when he said Ethan wasn't strong enough. But I knew better. Ethan wasn't weak. He was unprepared. Sent forward because someone had decided his hesitation made him expendable. And when I traced the edits in the translation file, when I saw the authorization code tied to the changes, my stomach hollowed. It was his. My father's. I confronted him once, trembling with fury. He didn't shout. He didn't even deny it. He only said, "Operational optics matter. Your brother knew the risk." That was the night something in me broke. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed Ethan. He'd chosen ambition over blood, silence over truth. From that day forward, I stopped calling him Dad. He was Colonel Ward, a man who believed stars on his shoulder weighed more than the life of his son, more than the voice of his daughter. And me, I disappeared into the quiet, carrying guilt that didn't belong to me but felt stitched into my skin. When the Army revoked my clearance, it wasn't with ceremony. No formal discharge, no folded flag. Just a badge that stopped working and an inbox I could no longer open. One day, I was Captain Briggs, trusted with secrets that could tilt borders. The next, I was nobody, a woman with no rank, no title, and too many ghosts. I rented a basement apartment outside Arlington, the kind that smelled faintly of mildew and boiled coffee. It was quiet, anonymous. No one there cared what I had lost. For a while, I thought that was what I wanted to vanish, to stop carrying the weight of lies signed with my father's name. But silence has a way of rotting you from the inside. I found work at a community center teaching English to refugee children, most of them Afghan. The classroom was a converted gym with flickering lights and folding chairs, but it became a place where voices mattered. Kids clutched notebooks the way soldiers clutched rifles. Some barely spoke at all. Some whispered poems in Dari when they thought I couldn't understand. I always did. One boy, maybe 9, asked me once if I'd ever been in the Army. I hesitated, then nodded. He studied my face and said, "You look like someone who doesn't yell." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in years. For 2 years, I lived that way, chalk dust on my hands instead of sand. The sound of children's laughter instead of radio static. I told myself I didn't miss the uniform. And maybe I didn't. What I missed was purpose. The chance to stop a disaster with a single sentence. Then, one winter afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number from Dios Brie. I almost ignored it, until the voice on the other end spoke 5 words in Dari, words no outsider should have known. My breath caught. I knew then the silence was over. The Pentagon hadn't changed. The marble floors still echoed with every step. The air still smelled of disinfectant and old paper, and the corridors still hummed with the weight of secrets. But walking back through those doors after years in exile felt like stepping into a memory I never wanted. They didn't bring me in through the main entrance. A young officer met me by a side gate and escorted me upstairs without a word. No salute. No welcome back, just a silent acknowledgement that I was there for something specific, something fragile. When the elevator doors opened, I saw the war room spread out before me, a ring of generals, glowing maps along the walls, live feeds of distant terrain shifting across giant screens. And then I saw him, Colonel Richard Ward, my father. He didn't move when I entered, but his eyes found me instantly, sharp and unyielding. The uniform was pressed to perfection, medals glinting under the lights. To everyone else, he was a decorated officer. To me, He was the man who had rewritten truth into a death sentence. There was one empty chair beside him. I walked toward it deliberately, heels striking marble. When I sat, he leaned the slightest inch closer, just enough so no one else could hear. Still clinging to those little translator tricks, he whispered, the same venom he'd used years ago. I didn't answer. I let silence be the reply. General Lawson began the briefing. His voice cut through the room with authority, describing intercepted transmissions layered in Dari, Pashto, and coded slang. Analysts debated syntax. Linguists argued over dialects, but none of it sounded right to me. It wasn't just chatter. It was intention disguised as noise. Finally, Lawson turned to me. Captain Briggs, initial impressions. The room stilled, my father's arms crossed, his jaw tightening. Dozens of eyes waited. My throat burned, but I stood anyway. Your translation is wrong, I said calmly. It isn't metaphor. It's instruction. And just like that, the silence shifted. The air in the room felt heavier after I spoke, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. No one interrupted me, not even the analysts who moments earlier had been so eager to debate dialects. I pointed to the intercepted phrase on the screen. The river sleeps when the hawk lands. It isn't poetry. It means cease surveillance after an aerial drop. If you read it as metaphor, you miss the directive. I let my eyes travel around the table, landing last on my father. His throat worked as if he wanted to speak, but the words never came. That was when General Lawson shifted in his chair. He'd been silent, watching, weighing every sound in the room. Then, without warning, he spoke in flawless Dari. 5 words, ancient, tribal, carrying the cadence of a forgotten village. Baradar Marg az Qatar Miayad. Brother, death comes from danger. The room froze. Dozens of decorated officers, intelligence experts, analysts, none of them moved. Not one responded. They didn't know if it was a proverb, a warning, or a test. The silence was thick enough to suffocate. But I knew. I heard not just the meaning, but the memory behind it, the same phrasing I'd once deciphered in a blackout tent years ago, when a mistranslated word almost triggered a drone strike. I drew a breath. My voice didn't waver. Zinda mimanad agar gush konad. He will live if he listens. Every head turned. Chairs creaked. Somewhere a pen dropped, the tiny sound ringing like a gunshot. Lawson rose to his feet, his gaze locked with mine, unwavering. Then he said it slowly, each word a verdict. She is Aegis. Gasps scattered through the room. A few officers leaned forward, as if they'd just seen history rearrange itself. My father's face drained of color, his jaw tightening until the vein at his temple throbbed. For the first time in my life, he looked small. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood still, letting the silence belong to me. When the room finally broke apart, the air felt charged, as if the words still hung above our heads, too heavy to settle. Officers shuffled their notes, analysts avoided eye contact, and one by one they filed out. Only General Lawson remained, his hand resting on a thin red folder. He slid it across the polished table toward me. "Open it," he said. Inside was a transcript, columns of Dari and English, side by side. At first glance, it looked like any routine negotiation log, a tribal elder offering safe passage in exchange for peace. But the words weren't right. The Dari carried weight, threat. If your tanks do not pull back, we will plant fire. The English translation on record had softened it into we offer water and no resistance. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Lawson leaned forward. That translation killed 7 soldiers and 2 local guides, and the interpreter disappeared afterward, but the credentials used to approve it. He tapped the page. They're not just forged. They're personal. My stomach tightened as I scanned the metadata. The clearance code embedded at the bottom was one I knew too well, my father's. His signature encrypted into the file like a confession written in invisible ink. I looked up slowly, but Lawson's expression didn't change. He already knew. He was waiting for me to see it for myself. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, that maybe he'd been coerced. Maybe his credentials stolen. But the pattern was too precise. The phrasing, the orthography, even the old Soviet-era diacritics he'd once taught me to copy as a child, they were all his. Lawson's voice was low. This isn't the first time. We've traced anomalies going back years, and every trail leads to him. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My father hadn't just betrayed Ethan. He'd been twisting words into weapons for decades, and I had spent half my life trying to prove to him that language mattered, while he used it to trade lives for power. I closed the folder with shaking hands. "Why show me this? Because you're the only one who can read the patterns," Lawson said. "And because this isn't about vengeance, it's about whether truth still has a voice in this building." I stared at the folder, at the weight of it, at the way it seemed to hum against my fingertips. I thought of Ethan's last words to me, the way his voice cracked with fear, the way I told him it would be fine even though I knew better. I thought of my mother's whisper, "Whoever understands language understands war before it starts." And I thought of my father, sitting not 10 feet away just hours earlier, dismissing me as if I were still that girl scribbling strange sounds in a notebook. I met Lawson's gaze. I'll testify. For the first time, his shoulders eased. He gave a small nod, almost reverent. Then, history will finally listen. The hearing never made headlines. There were no cameras waiting outside the secured doors, no parades of pundits shouting on morning television. Justice came quietly, sealed behind military walls, the way betrayal had once been hidden. But this time, the silence belonged to me. Colonel Richard Ward, my father, was stripped of command authority. He faced charges no medal could shield him from. I didn't watch him led away. I didn't need to. For once, the truth no longer bent around his rank. I walked out of the Pentagon at dawn, the sky pale with the first stretch of light. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. Ethan's name would no longer be buried under bad intel. He would no longer be just a casualty of war. He would be remembered as a soldier betrayed by silence and avenged by the voice he trusted most. Weeks later, I stood in front of the memorial wall, fingers tracing his name etched in stone. The marble was cold, but the words that rose in me were warm, steady. Baradar marg az katar miayad, zinda mimanad agar gush konad. Brother, death comes from danger. He will live if he listens. For the first time, I believed Ethan was listening. I didn't need applause, or recognition, or even forgiveness. What I needed was purpose, and I found it again, not in a war room, but in a classroom at West Point. Cadets sat in rows, young faces taut with ambition, and I taught them what no satellite could capture, that understanding is terrain, and terrain wins wars. Some rolled their eyes, others leaned closer. But when I wrote a proverb on the board, "The language of the people is the language of God," the room went quiet. They were listening, and in that silence, I heard it clearly. The legacy I carried was not my father's. It was my brother's. My name is Miranda Beck, and I thought I had learned everything there was to know about danger during my years in the military police. But nothing prepared me for the sound that ripped me out of sleep at 2 a.m, the pounding on my apartment door, sharp and frantic, like someone was trying to break through the wood with their fists. I swung my legs off the couch, half awake, and grabbed the sweatshirt draped over the chair. The pounding came again, louder this time. I edged toward the door, every nerve on alert, the same way I used to be on patrol overseas. I peered through the peephole and froze. It wasn't a stranger. It was my sister, Elna. Her face was pale under the hallway light, one eye swollen, her hair plastered with sweat. She clutched the handles of a wheelchair where her daughter, Maya, sat stiff and silent, her small hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. I unlocked the door, and before I could even speak, Elena collapsed against me. Maya's wheelchair jammed in the doorway, and I wrestled it inside with one hand while holding my sister up with the other. The living room filled with the sound of her ragged breathing. My phone buzzed on the counter. At first, I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name flash across the screen. Mom. I swiped it open. The text stared back at me. Don't save her. Don't waste yourself on that cripple. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The woman who drilled into us that family was everything had just told me to let my sister and her little girl die on my doorstep. I set the phone down, my jaw locked. I pulled Elena closer, whispered, "You're safe now." Then I reached for the phone again, this time to dial 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced, asking me questions I could barely process. I rattled off my address, my eyes locked on Elena, slumped against the couch cushions. Every rise and fall of her chest felt fragile, like it might stop if I looked away too long. Maya hadn't said a word since I brought her in. She sat in her chair near the coffee table, clutching a silver locket that used to belong to our grandmother. The chain glinted in her small fist, as if it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes darted between me and her mother, wide and terrified. "Elna, stay with me," I urged, crouching down beside her. She flinched when I touched her ribs, and I knew what that meant. Years in uniform had taught me the difference between a bruise and something broken. This was worse than anything I'd seen her endure before, and I couldn't shake the thought of what kind of hell she'd been living through for her body to look like that. "Don't send me back," she whispered, her voice so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. I brushed damp strands of hair from her face. "You're not going anywhere but the hospital." The knock on my door this time wasn't frantic. It was steady, firm. I looked through the peephole and saw a paramedic with a red bag over his shoulder and an officer just behind him. Relief hit me like a wave, but I didn't let it show. I opened the door wide, stepping aside so they could reach Elena. The paramedic knelt and began his assessment. His questions clipped but gentle. Elena tried to answer, each word costing her. Maya's gaze followed every movement, her little body stiff with fear. I crouched next to her. "They're here to help your mom," I said. She gave the smallest nod, still clutching the locket like a lifeline. As they eased Elena onto a stretcher, I caught the officer watching me, waiting. "Do you know who did this?" he asked. My throat tightened. I glanced at my sister. She shook her head ever so slightly. "Not yet." I told him, my voice steady though my chest was burning. I wheeled Maya alongside the stretcher toward the elevator, the hum of the summer night seeping in through the stairwell. Whatever story Elena wasn't ready to tell, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just an accident, and I wasn't letting her face it alone. The ambulance jolted forward, its lights casting red streaks across the dark streets. I sat wedged between Elena's stretcher and Maya's wheelchair, my hand steady on the little girl's shoulder, even as my mind spun. Elena's eyes fluttered half open, fixed on the ceiling, an oxygen mask fogging faintly with each shallow breath. Maya shifted, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "Grandma was there." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "When, sweetheart, tonight," she said, her fingers digging into the locket until her knuckles turned pink. She told me not to talk. My stomach clenched. Not to talk about what her eyes flicked to her mother, then back to me, about Derek. Elena's hand twitched on the blanket. She didn't speak, but her silence was enough. The officer riding in back with us caught the exchange, his gaze sharp but patient. "Is Derek the one we need to find?" he asked. Elena shook her head faintly under the mask. "Don't, not yet." I met her eyes, anger simmering just below my ribs. Staying quiet won't make this better. She turned away, tears sliding silently into her hairline. The paramedic called out her blood pressure low, likely internal bleeding. My jaw tightened. Maya's small voice broke the silence again. "He said he'd take me away. Said Mom couldn't stop him." The words landed heavier than any punch. I forced my voice steady for her sake. "He's not taking you anywhere. Not while I'm here." The ambulance slowed, pulling into the hospital bay. Doors swung open, floodlights spilling in. Another team took Elena's stretcher, rolling her through sliding glass doors. I pushed Maya close behind, her wheelchair rattling over the pavement. As we entered the ER, the sharp smell of antiseptic stung my nose. For the first time in years, I realized this fight wasn't going to be about what I had seen on deployment or learned in uniform. This was about family, about betrayal so deep it could cut bone, and about the choice I had already made that whatever secret Elena was carrying, I would dig it out and face it with her, no matter what it cost. The ER swallowed us whole, bright lights and hurried voices echoing off sterile walls. Nurses clustered around Elena's stretcher, calling out vitals, hooking her up to machines that beeped in steady, urgent rhythm. I stayed close, one hand on Maya's chair, the other pressed against the edge of the curtain that separated us from the rest of the chaos. A doctor in scrubs pulled me aside, her voice low but firm. "She's got 2 fractured ribs, heavy bruising along her side, and signs of blunt force trauma. We're scanning for internal bleeding. This wasn't one fall, these injuries are layered." I nodded, though my teeth ground so hard it hurt. "She's safe here," I said, more to myself than to her. When I stepped back behind the curtain, Maya was staring at her mother, her eyes wide, her grip on that locket unshakable. I crouched beside her. "You holding up?" She nodded once, then whispered, "He spends my checks. Grandma says it's for the house, but it's not." My chest went cold. "Your checks." Her little chin lifted in defiance, even as tears pooled in her eyes. "The money the government sends because of me. For my chair, my medicine. He uses it for trips, for drinks. Grandma helps him." The words sliced deeper than any battlefield wound I'd ever seen. I looked at Elena, pale against the sheets, eyes barely open. She tried to speak, her lips trembling under the mask. I bent close, catching her whisper. "He takes everything, and she lets him." I didn't answer right away. Rage wasn't useful unless I knew where to point it. Instead, I reached for my pocket notebook, the same one I'd used years ago to build timelines in investigations, and started writing. Dates, fragments, every word Maya had just spoken. Because this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was theft, fraud, abuse wrapped in betrayal. And it was going to stop, one way or another. By the time dawn broke through the hospital blinds, I had already shifted gears. Grief and rage had their place, but neither built a case. What did were facts, dates, and evidence that couldn't be twisted. While Elena slept, I stepped into the hallway and opened my laptop at a small metal table. The Wi-Fi was sluggish, but good enough. Using the routing numbers on one of her benefit letters, I started tracing transactions. It didn't take long. The account was in Derek's name, with Vivian as co-signer. Purchases lit up the screen: Vegas resorts, expensive tools, electronics, not $1 toward Maya's care. I snapped screenshots, encrypted the folder, and backed it up twice. Years in the service had taught me 1 copy was a risk, 2 was insurance. My fingers shook, not from doubt, but from the cold clarity that comes when you realize the people who should protect a child are bleeding her dry. A familiar voice interrupted my focus. "You digging where you shouldn't." Miranda Derek's voice oozed smugness even before I looked up. He stood in the doorway, too clean, too calm, like he'd rehearsed this moment. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, my tone flat. He leaned on the doorframe, eyes narrowing. "Relax. I'm just here to clear the air. Family business, right behind me." My laptop screen still glowed with his trail of theft. I closed it slowly, tilting my phone in my hand so the red recording dot shone bright. "Keep talking, Derek." The smirk slipped. He stepped back, muttering, "You're making a mistake. You've got a career. Be a shame if word got out you were abusing it." I didn't move. Threats go real nice in court. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He turned and walked away, shoulders stiff. I locked the door behind him, heart pounding but steady. I had what I needed. Proof of fraud, proof of intimidation. And if Derek thought a few empty threats could scare me off, he had no idea who he was dealing with. 2 days later, I sat in a cramped county courtroom with Elena beside me and our attorney, Clara Jensen, sharp as glass in a navy suit. Elena's hands trembled in her lap, but her gaze stayed forward. Maya waited in a separate room with a child advocate, crayons spread out on the table so she wouldn't have to hear what adults were about to say. Across the aisle, Derek sat stiff in a suit one size too big, jaw clenched like he was auditioning for respectability. Vivian sat next to him, pearls around her neck, her posture prim as if appearances alone could erase what she'd done. The judge called the hearing to order, and Derek's lawyer launched first. He painted Elena as unstable, claiming she had abandoned the marital home and left her disabled child in emotional turmoil. Every sentence dripped with rehearsed sympathy. Elena's face blanched, but Clara rested a hand over hers, steadying her. When our turn came, Clara rose slowly, her voice calm but edged like a blade. "Your Honor, my client did not abandon her home. She fled it after being assaulted in front of her child." She held out photographs, Elena's bruised ribs, the medical reports. The bailiff carried them up to the bench, and the judge's brows tightened as he flipped through each page. Clara continued, sliding another folder forward. "We also have documentation showing Mr. Merrick and Ms. Blake co-managing an account into which Maya Beck's disability benefits are deposited. Funds intended for her care have been spent on luxury travel, electronics, and unrelated purchases. Not a cent on her medical needs." Derek shifted. His lawyer stammered, but Clara wasn't finished. She tapped my phone, connected to the speaker. Derek's voice filled the courtroom. "You're making a mistake getting involved. Be a shame if word got out you were abusing your career." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the judge scribbling notes. His gaze shifted from Derek to Vivian, who kept her chin high, but couldn't meet his eyes. For the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath us. They weren't untouchable anymore. The victory in that first hearing was thin and temporary. By the following morning, I knew Derek and Vivian weren't going to retreat. They were going to strike harder. I'd barely poured my first cup of coffee when an email landed in my inbox from the compliance office at my firm. A formal complaint alleged I had misused professional access to dig into private financial records. Attached was Vivian's signature. I stared at it, heat rising in my chest. She wasn't just standing behind Derek anymore. She was aiming straight at me. At the hospital later that day, Elena sat propped up with pillows, looking stronger, though the bruises on her face hadn't faded. I didn't want to add to her burden, but she deserved to know. "They filed a complaint against me," I told her quietly. "They're trying to discredit anything I uncover." Her eyes filled, guilt flickering across her features. "Miranda, you can't lose your job over this." I shook my head. "I'm not the one who should be worried." Before she could answer, Clara strode in, phone in hand. "I've been digging," she said, dropping into a chair. "Derek's military record doesn't match the disability claim he filed. He's been collecting checks for an injury that never happened." The words hit like a drumbeat. Fraud at the federal level. This wasn't just about stolen family money anymore. This was prison time if it held up. Maya wheeled closer, her eyes big. "Does that mean he goes away?" she asked. I crouched beside her chair. "It means he has bigger problems than us, but we still have to be careful." That night, as I drove back to my apartment, headlights flashed too long in my rearview mirror. A black SUV trailed me for 6 blocks before peeling off. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, but the message was clear. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and burnt coffee the morning of the full custody hearing. Elena walked between me and Clara, clutching a thin binder of medical records and her written statement. Her steps were slow but steady, determination in everyone. Maya stayed with a child advocate in a separate room, coloring with crayons instead of being forced to listen to her father argue over her like she was a piece of property. Derek sat at the defense table in another ill-fitting suit, but this time there was no smug grin. He looked tight, restless. Vivian was beside him, dressed in a pale blue blazer, her chin lifted in false dignity. She gave me a quick glance that tried to say she still held the cards. I met her eyes without blinking. She didn't. The judge called the case, and Derek's attorney launched into a tired narrative. Elna was financially incapable, emotionally unstable, a mother who abandoned her child in the dead of night. The words felt rehearsed, empty. Elena gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, but stayed quiet. Clara squeezed her hand before rising. "Your Honor, my client left her home because she feared for her life and her daughter's safety. We have medical reports documenting her injuries, photographs of her bruises, and witness testimony." Clara gestured to the bailiff, who carried evidence to the bench. The judge flipped through the photographs, his expression sharpening. Then Clara pulled out the heavier artillery. "We also present bank records showing Mr. Merrick and Ms. Blake's misuse of Maya's disability benefits. These funds were spent on luxury travel, electronics, and personal goods, not on the child's medical needs. Furthermore, there is evidence Mr. Merrick submitted a falsified disability claim to the VA. That investigation is already underway." The courtroom grew still. Derek shifted, his jaw twitching. He blurted, "I didn't handle the money, Vivian did." The words rang through the room. Clara pounced. "So you contradict your sworn statement from last month, where you claimed full responsibility for household finances." The judge's pen scratched across his notes. Vivian's face stayed composed, but a flicker of panic rippled through her eyes. Finally, Elena rose, her voice clear though soft. "I didn't abandon my daughter. I escaped. I left because he hit me in front of her, because my mother told me to stop making a scene, and because they were stealing what belonged to Maya." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the judge clearing his throat. Temporary full custody awarded to Mrs. Merrick. All benefits redirected to an account in her name only. "Mr. Merrick, you will have no visitation rights pending further review, for the first time in weeks." Elena exhaled as though she could breathe again. Rain slicked the courthouse steps as we walked out. But for once, the weight on Elena's shoulders seemed lighter. She held her binder tight against her chest, as if those pages were proof she wasn't invisible anymore. Beside her, Clara spoke to reporters gathering near the entrance, her voice calm, her words sharp. I kept Elena moving, guiding her past the flashing cameras toward the parking lot where Maya was waiting with the advocate. When Maya spotted us, she wheeled forward fast, a grin breaking across her face. "Did we win?" she asked. Elena knelt, gathering her daughter in her arms. "Yes, baby, we won!" I stood back a moment, letting the scene etch itself into memory, the girl who had clung to a locket, in fear, now smiling like the sun had finally broken through. Elena's eyes glistened as she looked at me. "I thought I'd never get free. You gave us this chance." I shook my head. "You took it. I just stood beside you." Later that evening, at their new townhouse, Maya showed me her room, a silver chain hanging on the wall above her bed. She pressed the locket into my hand. "Keep it," she said softly. "So you remember you saved us." The metal was warm from her touch. I closed my fingers around it, knowing I would never forget. Justice hadn't erased the scars, but it gave them something stronger: safety, and the freedom to live without fear. For me, that was the only victory that mattered. My name is McKenna Walsh, and the sound of my father's laughter still echoes in that hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights above hummed and flickered as he told the doctors, with a grin too wide for the moment. "She's just unemployed. Don't mind her. Always been a dreamer." I stood a few feet away, wearing jeans and an old navy blue sweater, my sneakers scuffed from too many miles on the road. To everyone else in that room, I must have looked like the child who never grew up, the daughter who had nothing better to do than hover around her mother's bedside. My father filled the silence like he always did, owning the space with his voice and his certainty, and me, I stayed quiet, watching the way the nurses shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should laugh along with him or look away. I wanted to say something, to stop him, to tell them all he was wrong. But I had learned long ago that my words never carried weight in his world. He was the one with the booming voice, the business, the reputation. I was just the daughter who, in his mind, had never accomplished a thing worth noticing. The sting wasn't new, but that night it cut deeper because of where we were outside a room where my mother fought for her life after another heart attack. My father's laughter bounced off the sterile walls, his words dismissing me as if I were still a child playing soldier in the backyard, and for a moment, standing there with my hands cold and my chest tight, I wondered if anyone in that hallway would ever believe who I really was, because the truth was, I wasn't unemployed, I was a colonel. My father had always been the kind of man who introduced his children like trophies on a shelf. At family gatherings, he would boom with pride as he told everyone about Daniel, my brother, the sharp attorney who never lost a case, and about Claire, my sister, the brilliant cardiologist who saved lives in Phoenix. Then, with a chuckle meant to dismiss me, he would say, "And this is McKenna still figuring things out, still playing at being in the Army." The words usually drew polite laughter from cousins and neighbors. I learned to keep my smile fixed, though it never reached my eyes. I can still remember the first time he said it in front of a stranger. I had just returned from a deployment overseas, exhausted but proud. At a Christmas party, he leaned across the table, introduced me as the daughter who liked to play dress-up in fatigues, and carried on with a story about selling out his car lot in a single weekend. Nobody asked me about my work. Nobody ever did. For years I tried to correct him. I would bring up the missions, the long months away, the things I could say without betraying my oath. But the moment I spoke, his voice would drown me out, sliding into another anecdote about profits or property deals. It didn't take long for my siblings to follow his lead. Daniel teased me gently, as if I'd chosen a hobby instead of a profession. Claire, the doctor, insisted I was chasing adrenaline because I couldn't handle a stable career. At first, I thought it was ignorance, that they didn't understand the world I had stepped into. But ignorance turned into willful blindness. They stopped asking altogether. At birthdays and holidays, I became the ghost at the table, present but unseen, a silent gap between their laughter. Even at the hospital, with our mother's monitors beeping steadily in the background, nothing changed. Daniel reviewed medical charts like he was back in court. Claire hovered over IV bags with the calm of a professional, and my father gave orders to doctors as if he owned the building. When a scheduling conflict came up, he gestured to me and said, "McKenna's free all the time. She doesn't have a real job." The nurses smiled politely, but I caught the flicker in their eyes, the same flicker I'd seen for years. They believed him. When I was 8, my father used to parade me through his garage, calling me his little general. I would line up my toy soldiers by rank, arranging them into squads and battalions, proud of the order I created. Back then, he looked at me with something like admiration, telling his employees that one day I would run the world. I clung to those words, not knowing how quickly they would sour. The day I told him I had enlisted instead of going to college, he shook his head like I had betrayed some unspoken contract. "You're running away from responsibility," he said, as though choosing service meant I was avoiding real life. When I made sergeant at 22, he dismissed it as a phase. "She's still figuring things out," he told relatives at Thanksgiving, laughing as if my promotions were a joke. But the years carried me forward, no matter how much he looked away. Officer training, deployments, late nights buried in intelligence briefings that shaped missions across the globe. I lived them all without his acknowledgement. Each step up the ladder only seemed to deepen the chasm between us. I mailed photos once, after a change of command ceremony overseas, my uniform pressed, the insignia gleaming on my chest. He glanced at them and said, "Nice costume party." After that, I stopped trying to explain. What hurt wasn't just his dismissal, but how easily my siblings mirrored it. Daniel introduced me as the sister still in the army. Never more. Claire would smile thinly, telling me she worried I'd never settle down. To them, I was the one who had taken the detour and never found my way back. The irony was almost cruel. For years, my father's voice had shaped the way people saw me. Once he'd said I could run the world, and for a while, I believed him. Now, he told everyone I was lost, and they believed that too. And the part that cut deepest was knowing I had built a life he could never even imagine, yet he refused to see it. The hospital had become our second home in those weeks, its corridors echoing with the shuffle of nurses' shoes and the low hum of machines. My mother lay fragile in her bed, her breaths shallow but steady, while my father assumed command of every conversation with the doctors. He barked questions about procedures, as if he were negotiating a contract, and the staff, perhaps out of habit or politeness, deferred to his booming presence. Daniel stationed himself with the paperwork, highlighting phrases in medical journals as though he were preparing a case. Claire moved with practiced precision around the IV stand, adjusting tubes, asking questions in the clipped tone of a physician speaking to another. They fit naturally into roles that everyone could understand: the lawyer, the doctor, the decisive father. And then there was me, hovering at the edge, invisible. When the nurses asked about schedules for visits, my father waved toward me. "McKenna's always available. She doesn't have a real job." His voice carried across the room, casual, certain. The nurses gave that same polite half-smile, the one I had come to dread. They didn't see me as anything but what he said I was. That evening, as I sat by my mother's bed, holding her hand, my phone buzzed. The screen lit with a priority message, a notification I recognized instantly. A briefing moved, a secure call to prepare. I read it quickly, already rearranging my obligations in my head. To my father, it looked like I was scrolling through social media. "For God's sake, McKenna!" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to draw glances from nearby patients' families. "Your mother is lying here fighting for her life, and you're playing on your phone." I opened my mouth to explain, but Daniel cut in, his tone edged with irritation. "Maybe put it away. Mac, this is more important than whatever hobby you've got going." Claire shook her head, muttering, detached from reality. As always, their words hit harder than I expected. Detached from reality. To them, that was all my years of service amounted to some elaborate delusion. I sat frozen, the weight of it pressing down until the room blurred at the edges. I rose from the chair slowly, my mother's hand slipping from mine as I leaned down to kiss her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, dazed but searching, and I whispered that I would be back. My chest ached as I straightened, the silence in the room heavy except for the steady beep of her monitor. My father was pacing near the window, arms folded, his jaw tight. He didn't even glance at me when he said, "Of course you're leaving. That's what you do. McKenna, run away when things get real." Something inside me snapped. I turned toward him, and for the first time in years, I let the anger sharpen my voice. "Tomorrow morning, I will brief the Secretary of Defense on operations in Syria. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll help prepare materials that go straight to the president's desk. And next week, I'll be in Germany, coordinating intelligence with NATO allies. That's not a hobby. That's my job." He let out a laugh, the same dismissive chuckle I had heard all my life. "Sure, McKenna. And I suppose after that, you'll have dinner with the Queen of England." Daniel smirked behind his papers. Claire rolled her eyes. Even the nurse froze, uncertain whether she was witnessing a family fight or a breakdown. The words stung, but more than that, The disbelief in their eyes cut deep. I had spent years briefing generals, analyzing threats, making decisions that shifted the weight of nations. And in this room, I was nothing but a child pretending. I steadied my breath, nodded once, and walked toward the door. Each step away felt heavier, as though I was leaving more than just the room I was leaving behind, the hope that they would ever understand. Out in the corridor, the air smelled of antiseptic and coffee, and I finally exhaled. I would drive through the night back to Washington. My work demanded me, and for the first time, I decided to stop begging my family to see me. If they couldn't, then so be it. The drive back to Washington blurred into hours of highway lights and restless thoughts. By dawn, I pulled through the security gates of the Pentagon, exhaustion clinging to my shoulders. Yet when I buttoned my dress blues and felt the weight of the eagle insignia gleaming at my collar, something inside me steadied. Here. I wasn't the invisible daughter. Here. I was exactly who I had worked to become. The corridor smelled of polished floors and fresh coffee, alive with the quiet hum of officers moving with purpose. I walked into the E-Ring conference room, where a dozen senior leaders were already seated, generals with rows of ribbons across their chests, analysts with thick binders of classified reports, State Department officials murmuring about policy lines. I took my place at the table, one of only 3 colonels present, and easily the youngest. The briefing began, screens flickering with satellite imagery and coded transmissions. When it was my turn, I spoke with the calm precision I had honed over years, laying out intelligence assessments, risks, and recommendations for action. My words carried weight here. They weren't dismissed or laughed at. They shaped decisions that would ripple across continents. As I pointed to a map of northern Syria, outlining movements of proxy groups, a thought flickered through me less than 12 hours ago. My father accused me of playing games on my phone. Now, those same devices fed me encrypted streams that could alter the trajectory of a conflict. The contrast was almost too sharp to hold in my mind. In one world, I was an unemployed dreamer. In this one, I was trusted with lives, strategy, and national security. By the time the meeting ended, additional surveillance had been approved, and I felt the familiar buzz of duty settle in. Yet as I left the room, passing portraits of past defense secretaries on the wall, the sting of last night hadn't faded. My family's disbelief clung to me like a shadow. I told myself it didn't matter, but deep down, I knew it did. While I buried myself in the work that morning, back in Arizona, the hospital corridor held its own reckoning. My phone had been set to silent, and I'd missed several encrypted check-ins from my operations officer. Standard protocol dictated what came next if a senior officer failed to respond. Someone would be dispatched to verify their status. So just after noon, as my father sat in the waiting room, flipping through paperwork with Daniel and Claire, 3 uniformed officers walked in. Their shoes struck the linoleum with steady rhythm, their ribbons and badges catching the fluorescent light. Conversations hushed instantly. My father stood halfway, wary, his voice gruff. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them, a lieutenant colonel with silver oak leaves on his shoulders, looked directly at him. "We're looking for Colonel Walsh. Is she here?" My father let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Colonel! There's no colonel here. Only my daughter, McKenna, unemployed. A bit lost." "You've got the wrong person." The officer's expression didn't waver. He opened a folder and pulled out a glossy photograph, me in full dress uniform, shaking hands with a 4-star general after a joint briefing. "This is Colonel Walsh," he said firmly. "We need to confirm her well-being. She missed a scheduled check-in this morning." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Daniel's jaw went slack, Claire's eyes widened, and my father's face drained of color. The officer addressed him with crisp formality. "Sir, with respect, your daughter is one of the most critical intelligence officers in the Department of Defense. I wasn't there to see it, but later I would imagine the scene in perfect detail, my father holding the photograph, realizing every dismissal, every laugh at my expense, was collapsing under the weight of truth. The nurses at the desk whispered to one another. One even pulled up an article on her phone showing my name, my rank, and my assignments. For the first time, my father couldn't talk his way past it, the world he had built, where I was invisible, cracked open in front of him, and there was no going back. 2 nights later, I walked back through the hospital doors, this time not in jeans and a sweater, but in my full dress blues. The fabric was heavy against my shoulders, the silver eagle insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Every ribbon and badge stitched to the fabric carried its own story, years of service compressed into color and metal. I had worn this uniform in war zones and in briefing rooms, but never here, never in front of my family. When I stepped into my mother's room, Daniel and Claire froze. Their eyes swept over the decorations on my chest, recognition dawning slowly, as if they were seeing me for the first time. My father was seated beside the bed, his hand resting on my mother's arm. He looked up, and for a long moment, we simply stared at each other. He rose awkwardly, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "McKenna." His gaze lingered on the combat badge, the service medal, the parachutist wings. His throat tightened. I didn't know. I held my ground, my voice steady. "I tried to tell you, for years." He nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I called your commanding officer. I wanted to apologize, to understand. He told me about your deployments, the operations you've led, the intelligence that saved lives. He said you're being considered for general." His words stumbled, thick with regret. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand to his brow and gave me a clumsy civilian salute. His fingers shook, but his eyes brimmed with tears, held something I had never seen in him before. Respect. From the bed, my mother's lips curved faintly. Her voice was a whisper, but clear. "There's my little general." And in that moment, the years of disbelief, the laughter, the dismissal, all of it cracked, not erased, but broken open, leaving space for something new to grow. In the days that followed, the air between us shifted, fragile but undeniable. My father no longer filled silence with jokes at my expense. Instead, he asked questions tentative at first, then, with genuine curiosity. Daniel leaned forward whenever I spoke, fascinated by how intelligence and law sometimes overlapped. Claire asked about battlefield medicine, her voice edged with something like admiration. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the shadow at the table, but the real victory wasn't their acknowledgement. It was knowing that I had built something meaningful without their belief, without their applause, without their understanding. For 15 years, I had walked a path they chose not to see, and I had endured every smirk and dismissal along the way. I hadn't done it to prove them wrong. I had done it because an 8-year-old girl once believed she could lead, and I refused to let that child down. My father tells anyone who will listen now that his daughter serves high up in military intelligence. Sometimes I hear the pride in his voice and feel a twist of embarrassment, as though the man who once ignored me has swung too far the other way. But then I remind myself after years of invisibility, being seen perhaps even too much is a burden I can carry. I know our family will never be perfect. The old wounds don't vanish just because respect finally bloomed. Yet when I stood in that sterile hospital room in full uniform, my mother's faint smile aimed at me. I realized I didn't need perfection. I needed truth. The truth is that I became who I was meant to be, regardless of whether they noticed. The truth is that my worth was never theirs to define, and sometimes it takes a stranger in uniform stepping into a hospital hallway to ask for Colonel Walsh, to break the spell of disbelief that a family can cling to. I don't live for their approval anymore. I live for the work, for the soldiers whose lives depend on clear decisions, for the country I swore to protect. And most of all, I live for that little girl who once lined up toy soldiers and believed she could run the world. My brother's laugh cut sharper than the clink of his car keys against the counter. "Can't even afford a car," Martin said, letting the words hang in the dining room like smoke. The table was crowded with binders, mugs of coffee gone cold, and the same uneasy air that always crept in when we gathered here. Our childhood home hadn't changed much, but the tone inside it had. Every visit felt like a performance of who had climbed higher, earned more, bought bigger. I didn't answer him. I just glanced at the clock. Calm on the outside, though, my pulse tapped steadily in my wrist. 11 minutes. That was all I needed. My name is Zoe Franklin. I wear the Navy's khaki uniform, not because it was the easy path, but because it was the only one that felt like purpose. To my family, though, I'm the odd one out, the one who never settled down, the one who chose adventure over responsibility. They see my absence from boardrooms and cocktail parties as proof I've wasted potential. I've let them believe that, year after year, because fighting their picture of me felt impossible. But that afternoon, as they spoke about 5-star nursing facilities and how much each of them could afford to contribute, I listened in silence and let the seconds count down. The rumble reached us first as a tremor underfoot. Faint, but undeniable. Sophie frowned, lifting her latte mid-sentence. Martin broke off, his binder half closed. The sound swelled. Blades cutting air. Windows rattling. My mother looked up, startled, and my father turned his head toward the noise, like it was calling him. I rose slowly, brushing imaginary lint from my pressed slacks, and reached for the cap I had left by the door. My ride was here. The front windows shook as the helicopter hovered lower, its shadow sweeping across the lawn like a storm cloud. Martin moved first, his voice half a bark, half a question. "What the hell is that?" Sophie clutched her phone tighter, already angling for a video, though she looked more unsettled than amused. My mother's teacup rattled in its saucer as she whispered, "Is someone hurt?" And my father, his hands unsteady from the tremor that never quite left, leaned forward in his chair, more alert than I'd seen him all week. I didn't answer them, not yet. Instead, I stepped away from the table, feeling every pair of eyes track me. The cap fit into my hand with familiar weight. As I slid it on, the room seemed to still, even with the roar outside. Martin caught on before the others, his face twisted in disbelief. No. Zoe, you're not. Don't tell me that's for you." I met his stare. "It is." For a second, he looked like he'd laugh again, dismiss it as another one of my phases, the way he always had. But the sound outside was too real, too loud to ignore. "This is insane," Sophie said, forcing a laugh that cracked halfway through. "You called in a helicopter to what? Prove a point." My jaw tightened. "I didn't call it in to prove anything. It's transportation. I have somewhere to be after this meeting." I walked past them toward the door, the air vibrating with each rotation of the blades. "Behind me!" Martin's voice rose. "You're trying to show us up. That's what this is." I paused at the threshold, hand on the knob, and turned back just enough for them to see my face. "No, I'm done being underestimated. That's what this is." The door swung open, and the wind rushed in, catching my hair, stinging my eyes. On the porch, the Navy crewman stood at attention, headset gleaming, his salute crisp. The sight silenced every word that might have come from behind me. I lifted my hand in return, steady as steel, and for the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. The story wasn't theirs to tell about me anymore. It was mine. The blades roared overhead as I stepped onto the porch, the grass bending beneath the wash of wind. My brother's voice chased me out, sharp and ragged. "Zoe, stop, what are you trying to pull?" I turned slowly, my cap already settled in place. He looked ridiculous, standing in the doorway with papers fluttering from the binder still in his hand, his tie whipping against his shirt. My sister hovered just behind him, one hand shielding her face, the other clutching her phone as though documenting it might make sense of it. "This isn't a stunt," I said evenly. "It's my life." Martin shook his head like I'd spoken in another language. Since when are you what? Navy brass." "Since the day I earned it," I answered. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He stared at the insignia on my collar as if it had appeared by magic. Sophie laughed weakly, though her eyes betrayed her. "You really expect us to believe you just ride around in helicopters? What? Is this supposed to make us feel small?" I stepped down onto the lawn, the ground vibrating beneath my boots. "No, I'm not here to make you feel anything. I'm here to stop letting you define me." My mother's voice, frail but steady, cut through. "Zoe, is this who you are?" I looked back at her, and softer than before. I said, "Yes. Mom, this is me." The crewman gave me a nod, gesturing toward the open hatch. I lifted my voice above the thunder. "You can come with me, see what I do, or you can stay here and keep telling the story you prefer." Martin's mouth opened, then closed again, his pride fighting his disbelief. Sophie lowered her phone, fingers trembling around the case. My father, standing now with both hands gripping the doorframe, looked more present than he had in months. His eyes were on me, clear and searching, as if something long missing had just returned. I waited. The helicopter at my back, the house before me. For once, they would have to decide whether to follow my lead. The moment my boots hit the metal step of the helicopter, the noise swallowed everything else. My family followed hesitantly, pulled by a mix of fear and curiosity. Martin climbed in stiffly, as if the seat might betray him. Sophie slid across from me, clutching the straps beside her with white knuckles. My parents settled in with the crew's help, headsets adjusted gently over their ears. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and salt, familiar and grounding to me. To them, it was another planet. "Seatbelts on," the crew chief called, though his voice came smooth, unbothered. He had done this 1,000 times. The Seahawk lifted, steady and powerful. Our home shrank beneath us, the roof, the trees, the neat lawn, all looking so small. Martin refused to meet my eyes. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut like she could wish herself somewhere else. My mother stared at me across the space, her lips moving without sound, as though she was piecing together a daughter she had never really met. My father spoke first, his voice crackling through the headset. This is your world." "Yes," I said. "One part of it." Martin finally snapped his gaze to me. "So what? You're, what? Some kind of commander now, giving orders?" I held his stare. "Yes, that's exactly what I do." He scoffed, but the edge in his laugh was gone. I leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "I lead teams who make sure ships are supplied before they deploy. I coordinate relief after disasters. I handle the fuel, the food, the medicine, the ammunition, everything that keeps people alive when chaos breaks loose." Sophie opened her eyes slowly, blinking. You're serious." "Always was," I said. The coastline appeared beneath us, glittering under the afternoon sun. Ahead, the white sprawl of the naval facility spread across the land, runways and hangars laid out with precision. The crew chief pointed. "We're on approach." "Ma'am." I nodded, then glanced at my family. "You wanted to know who I really am? You'll see it soon." No one replied. They just looked out the window, watching as the truth they'd ignored for years came into view. The helicopter settled onto the landing pad with a shudder that rattled the seats. As the rotors slowed, the crewman swung the hatch wide and motioned us out. I stepped first, boots firm on the concrete, the wind tugging at my uniform. My family followed more cautiously, blinking against the brightness and noise of the base alive around us. Sailors moved with purpose across the tarmac, forklifts carrying crates, officers exchanging clipped words. the hum of coordination vibrating through every corner. Each one who passed me gave a nod or salute, quick and unquestioning. None of it was for show. It was how this world worked. Martin muttered under his breath. They just listen to you. Yes, I said without breaking stride. Because I've earned it. Inside the admin building, the air cooled. A young lieutenant approached with a folder, saluted crisply, and addressed me as Commander Franklin. My siblings froze at the title, eyes darting between the officer and me like they were watching a play where they didn't know the script. We entered a conference room already set with water bottles and brief packets written in civilian terms. I motioned for them to sit. This is what I do, I told them. Not the jokes you make at dinners, not the assumptions you've clung to. This. My father's trembling hands opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages slowly, but when he looked up, his gaze was steady. You're the one who coordinated the Haiti relief last year. I nodded once. My team did. The room went silent. Martin's jaw flexed as if words fought to escape but couldn't. Sophie pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes shining. My mother leaned forward, voice breaking just enough to matter. Zoe, we had no idea. I breathed in, letting the weight of years of dismissal press against me and then release. You never asked. For the first time, they had no defense. The silence in the conference room lingered like a fog until I broke it by standing. I crossed to a side cabinet and pulled out a slim navy blue binder, the cover embossed with a simple seal. When I set it on the table, the sound was louder than it should have been. This, I said, sliding it toward my mother, is the Meridian Trust. I started it 3 years ago. She hesitated before opening the cover. Her thin fingers traced the printed pages slowly. Sophie leaned over her shoulder, eyes flicking across the words. Martin stayed rigid in his chair, arms crossed, though I noticed the muscle ticking in his jaw. It's a foundation, I explained, funded from my re-enlistment bonuses and consulting work with defense contractors. We support elder care facilities, especially for veterans and first responders. My father shifted, his voice low but clear. You did this quietly. On your own, with help, I admitted. But yes, I built it so families like ours wouldn't have to fight waiting lists or settle for good enough care. I turned to my mother, steady. I've already secured a place for you and Dad at Rosehaven. It's small, private, but the best memory care in the region. Every expense is covered through the trust for as long as you need. Her eyes blurred as she blinked hard, clutching the binder as though it might vanish. Zoe, all this time we thought. Her voice trailed off. That I had nothing I finished for her. That I needed help, or pity I didn't correct you because you never wanted to hear otherwise. Sophie pressed a hand to her chest. You already arranged everything before we even asked? Yes, I said simply, because I don't wait until it's too late. The words settled heavy in the room. Undeniable. For the first time, my family saw not the shadow they'd painted me into, but the woman who had built something lasting while they weren't looking. That evening, I brought them back to my housing unit on base. It wasn't glamorous standard-issue furniture, narrow kitchen, a small patio that looked out over the parking lot, but it was mine. No one had decorated it for show. The pictures on the wall were of deployments and teams, not staged portraits. Sophie walked in first and gave a small startled laugh. This is simple. It's home, I said, setting down my cap. Martin scanned the living room like he was trying to reconcile it with the image he had always held of me. I expected granite counters, maybe some leather couches. I never cared about granite, I replied, pulling plates from the cabinet. I care that it's 5 minutes from my command and secure. I cooked quickly grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, nothing fancy. We sat around the small kitchen table, our knees bumping because of the space. For once, no one reached for a phone. My mother asked about the spices I used. My father took slow, careful bites, but listened intently. Sophie glanced at the photo of my team taped above the fridge. "Which one is you, middle row, clipboard in hand?" I answered. Martin let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You always did like being in charge. It's not about control," I said, pouring water into their glasses. "It's about clarity. Too much is at stake for guesswork." The room quieted. Then Sophie set her fork down, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "I was cruel to you last Christmas. I said you looked like you couldn't afford a real coat." She shook her head. "God, I was awful. You were who I expected you to be." I told her gently. "That's why I never told you the truth." Her eyes filled, shoulders trembling. "I don't want to be that anymore." "Then don't," I said simply. Martin rubbed the back of his neck. "And here I thought you'd toss in a few dollars for Dad's care. Turns out you've already carried everything." I looked at him steadily. "I wasn't going to embarrass you in front of everyone. That wouldn't have changed anything." This time, he didn't argue. He just nodded once, as if surrendering ground he'd held too long. 2 days later, I drove them out to Rosehaven, the care facility I had chosen months ago. The road wound through pines and opened onto a campus of low brick buildings with wide glass windows and gardens designed for walking. It didn't smell like bleach. It smelled like lavender and cut grass. The director met us at the entrance with a smile that was warm but professional. "Commander Franklin," she said, shaking my hand before greeting my family one by one. I noticed how my mother straightened at the title, not with discomfort, but with a quiet pride. Inside, sunlight spilled through skylights. The common areas were filled with soft chairs, bookshelves, and quiet corners for conversation. We passed a piano tucked into a lounge where an elderly man was playing a halting but familiar tune. My mother paused, tears rising, and whispered, "I used to know that one." My father kept his hands folded, studying everything closely. When we reached the memory wing, he touched the railing gently. "This feels steady," he said. It was the clearest statement he had made all day. Sophie surprised me with her questions about meal plans, social activities, therapy dogs. The staff answered patiently, and Sophie typed notes into her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. Martin, ever the lawyer, grilled the director about medical coverage, emergency protocols, liability. She didn't flinch, and to his credit, he seemed reassured by her answers. We sat in a shaded courtyard afterward. The director excused herself, leaving us to talk. I looked at my parents. "This is your choice. I've secured a spot. But if it doesn't feel right, say so." My mother took my father's hand. He gave her a small nod, then looked at me. "If you believe in this place, so do we." Martin leaned back, exhaling. "It's better than anything I found." "I agree," Sophie added. "They even have a book club. Mom and Dad, pet therapy on Tuesdays." I felt something unclench inside me. Years of tension easing as we came to a decision together, not out of competition, not out of ego, but unity, back at base. Martin lingered as we walked the corridors. He stopped beside a framed photo of my unit, his reflection merging with the glass. "You always looked like you knew where you were going," he said quietly. "I didn't always," I admitted, "but I knew I couldn't stay where I was." He nodded, expression softening. "That's enough sometimes." For the first time in years, I believed him. The garden at Rosehaven glowed under strands of lights that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Tables were arranged in a circle, each topped with simple wildflowers. It wasn't extravagant, but it carried a warmth that felt truer than any banquet hall. Guests trickled in neighbors. A few retired service members who had known my father. Friends of the family who remembered us as children. I watched my family move through the space like they finally belonged to themselves. My mother greeted everyone with genuine ease, her laughter brighter than I remembered. My father sat in the shade of a tree, Rosie, the golden retriever, resting loyally at his side. He looked content, present in a way I hadn't seen in years. Sophie helped an older woman with her plate, guiding her carefully to a seat. No performance, just care. And Martin, always the one with the sharp tongue, stood in the center of the lawn, glass in hand. He cleared his throat, nerves visible, but his voice carried. I never thought I'd say this in front of everyone, but I'm proud of my sister, Zoe Franklin. She showed me that success isn't always what you can measure in money or titles. Sometimes it's the kind that keeps ships moving, families safe, and people alive. Quiet strength is still strength. The crowd lifted their glasses. To Zoe, for once. I didn't shrink or wave it off. I let it land. Later, as twilight deepened, Sophie leaned against me on a bench while Martin walked our parents back inside. You should write a book, she murmured. I smiled. I don't need to. I'm living it. And beneath the lights, with the garden humming softly around us, I finally understood I didn't need vindication anymore. I had something better. I had peace.